Daniel was a gentle, soft-spoken man in his mid-30s, a tall, wary figure. His warm brown eyes often carried a quiet sadness. As a teacher at the primary school in Sabon Tasha, his life was dedicated to shaping young minds. Every morning, he stood before students, reciting Hausa folk tales and teaching them the importance of kindness and hard work. His laughter filled the classroom, and his calm presence soothed the children who adored him. But when the final bell rang and the students filed out, the weight on Daniel's chest grew heavier. He dreaded returning home to Sophia, his wife of 6 years, whose beauty has once lit up his world, but whose temper now made every day feel like walking through a minefield. Daniel had fallen for Sophia and Zaria during his time at Ahmedu Bello University. She was magnetic, her bold confidence drawing people like moth to a flame. Sophia was pursuing a law degree, determined to break barriers as a northern woman in a male-dominated field. Daniel, with his quiet love for books and his dream of becoming an educator, admired her drive. The love blossomed quickly, and they were married in a traditional ceremony. For a while, life seemed perfect. Daniel took pride in teaching while Sophia's legal career soared. They appeared to be the ideal couple. But over time, Sophia's relentless ambition began to clash with Daniel's quiet dreams. "You sit there day after day earning peanuts," she once said, her voice sharp with contempt. "Do you even think about our future? Or are you content living this simple life forever?" At first, Daniel tried to persuade her. He explained that teaching was his passion, that he found fulfillment in shaping young lives. But Sophia's frustration grew, and soon her anger turned into cutting insult. It started with the words, "Daniel, you are useless. What kind of man doesn't aspire for more? Look at the husbands of my friends. They are directors, businessmen, men of stature. And you, a primary school teacher." Daniel swallowed her words in silence, retreating himself. But one evening, after forgetting to pick up groceries she had asked for, the words turned into actions. She slapped him. The stink of her palm across his cheek shocked him. But Sophia's reaction stunned him even more. She broke down, tears streaming down her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Wallahi, I didn't mean to. I am under so much pressure at home. Please forgive me." Daniel forgave her. He convinced himself it was a one-time mistake, an aberration. But it wasn't. The abuse escalated. Sometimes it was a sharp slap when he disagreed with her. Other times, it was the belittling word that chipped away her spirit. One evening, after he quietly corrected her in front of a family friend, she had waited until they were alone to lash out. "Do you enjoy embarrassing me, Daniel? Is that your idea of being a man?" she hissed, her eyes aflame. Before he could answer, her hand struck his face again. The bruises on his arms and the scar along his jawline told a story he was too ashamed to share. In the conservative Kaduna community, Daniel felt no one would believe him. A man complaining of abuse? The idea would be laughed off, dismissed as impossible. He grew distant. His once lively conversation with his colleague reduced to polite nods. Sarah, his colleague, noticed the change. "Daniel, are you okay? You've been so quiet lately," she asked one afternoon. He forced a smile. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just tired, that's all." But inside, he was screaming. The day it all came to a head started like many others. Daniel woke up before dawn to the melodic sound of the adhan calling the faithful to prayers. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet except for a few distant murmurs of life staring away. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Sophia, and prepared himself for another day of teaching. That morning, he made breakfast, fried yams and eggs, Sophia's favorite, hoping to avoid her wrath for the day. She barely looked at the plate when she emerged from the bedroom, dressed sharply for work. "Is this all you could manage?" she asked, eyeing the food as though it offended her. Her voice was laced with disdain, but Daniel said nothing. He had grown used to her criticisms. Instead, he focused on finishing his own breakfast before heading to school. That evening, however, it was so different. Sophia arrived home late, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She was visibly agitated, her face flushed with anger. Daniel could tell from her sharp movement and the way she slammed her back onto the table that something had gone wrong at work. "Why is this house such a mess, Daniel?" she snapped, pointing at a pair of shoes by the door and a dish left unwashed in the sink. Daniel, who had just returned from an exhausting day at school, looked from where he was sitting. "I will clean it up in a moment," he said softly, knowing that any response might ignite her temper further. But his attempt to de-escalate only seemed to make things worse. "In a moment? That's your problem, Daniel. Everything with you is in a moment," she spat, her voice rising. "You are lazy, you are unambitious, and you are dragging me down with you." Daniel remained seated, staring at the floor as her words rained down on him. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, but the energy to argue had long since been drained from him. "I'm talking to you," she shouted, her voice crackling like a whip. She stormed towards him and grabbed his arm, yanking him to his feet. Her knees dug into his skin and he winced. "Sophia, please," he said quietly, trying to pull away, but she was relentless. "You don't get to ignore me, Daniel. You don't get to sit there like some mute idiot while I do everything in this marriage." Her hand came up, and before Daniel could react, the slap landed hard across his face. His hand snapped to the side, the sting spreading across his cheek. The impact sent him stumbling backwards into the kitchen counter, where his head hit against the sharp edge. The pain was immediate and blinding. He reached up to touch his forehead and felt the warm, sticky wetness of blood trickling down. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of his labored breathing. Sophia stood frozen, her chest heavy, her face a mixture of anger and something else. Fear, perhaps, or maybe guilt. "Look at what you made me do," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. As he sank to the floor, his back against the counter, he felt something inside him snap. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the accumulation of years of insults, slaps, bruises, both visible and invisible. Sophia's voice faded into the background as she stared at the blood on his fingers. For the first time, he realized if he stayed, this would never end. She wouldn't stop, and one day, it might be the worse than just a slap or a cut. It might be his life. Sophia moved toward him again, her hands reaching out as if to help. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Stop!" he said sharply, his voice louder than it had been in years. She froze, startled by the force in his tone. Daniel pushed himself to his feet, his body trembling. "I can't do this anymore, Sophia," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "I won't do it anymore." Without waiting for a response, he returned and walked out of the kitchen. He didn't care about the whispers of the neighbors or the shame that would come from leaving his own home. At that moment, survival was more important than pride. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the pain in his head throbbing, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, he had made a choice for himself. A chaos leaving the darkness behind and seek the light. The breaking point had come, and it had shattered the silence that had kept him imprisoned for so long. The next morning, Daniel mustered the courage to call a local NGO that supported victims of domestic violence. The woman on the other end, Fatima, listened patiently as Daniel poured out his story, his voice trembling with emotions. "Daniel, you are not alone," Fatima said firmly. "This is not your fault, and you don't have to endure this anymore. We will help you." For the first time, Daniel felt seen. He began attending counseling sessions and was connected with legal aid to help him file for separation. Sarah too became his confidant. "Daniel, you have been so strong," she said, her voice thick with emotions. "But strength doesn't mean suffering in silence. You deserve better." Leaving Sophia wasn't easy. The community whispered about him, questioning his decisions. A man leaving his wife? Over what? They murmured. But Daniel stayed resolute. He moved into a small apartment in Barnawa, a modest space where he began rebuilding his life. Therapy helped him confront his trauma, and the laughter of his students became his anchor. Months later, He joined a local advocacy group, sharing his story to challenge the stigma surrounding male victims of abuse. At a seminar in Ahmadu Bello University, he stood before a crowd, his voice steady as he recounted his journey. Abuse knows no gender, he said. Silence only allows it to thrive. But when we speak out, we reclaim our power. A young man approached him after the event, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Malam Daniel," he said. "I thought I was alone. Your story gave me hope." Daniel's scars remained, but they no longer defined him. His story became a beacon for others trapped in silence, a testament to resilience and the strength it takes to seek help. Underneath the Kaduna sky, in the city that once had been his prison, Daniel found freedom, not just from his path but within himself. As he walked home that evening, the sound of children playing filled the air, a reminder that even after the darkest night, the sun will always rise. Danjuma's hands, skilled at carving beauty from the wood, were the same hands that inflicted pain on Talatu. His temper, once mild, had grown violent over the years. It began with harsh words. Then, watch out for the next episode on Palantra TV, same time next week.